being reported today that the Social Development Department has now published a green paper which proposes that 12% of the salaries of everyone who works would be paid into a government fund. This would be mandatory, that fund would then be used for your retirement. It does seem it would be compulsory. The green paper also appears to be suggesting that government will move towards a basic income grant. Brenda Sibeko is the Deputy Director General for Social Development. Ma'am, good afternoon to you. What exactly is being proposed here?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your listeners. The proposals are quite comprehensive, and I think it's important to contextualize them. It's trying to ensure that we have a comprehensive system that covers everybody in the country, those who are able to pay and those who are not able to pay throughout their lifetime. So the benefits that we're talking about would relate first to people who have no income whatsoever. It's important that they are able to access social assistance or social grants in terms of a constitutional mandate. So that's where the basic income grant proposal features, because currently our social assistance program only provides cover for children, for people with disabilities, and also for older persons. But the age group, the working age group who have no income do not have cover. And this is a very significant gap that has led to governments now during COVID introducing the 360 grant. The fact of the matter, though, is that poverty that became more evident now has always been there in the country. It's just been hidden until COVID then exposed it. So we need to create a system that is comprehensive and long-term and always ensures that nobody in the country has zero income. Hence the idea of a basic income grant. But we are saying this should not be the only intervention. The social security system should also have a mechanism through which people who are working are able to contribute their salary over the period of their working life to make sure that they cover themselves in the event that they lose their jobs. That's how the unemployment insurance fund works. But also in the event that they become disabled or they die and leave dependents without any kind of support, and also for their retirement. Currently, the retirement system in the country is primarily based on the private sector system, where people have individual retirement annuities, or those schemes that are set up by employers or by unions. But the large proportion of the working age population that falls outside of those systems because their employers don't have funds, or they are not able to afford the individual contributions through a retirement fund, like a retirement annuity. We are anomalous as South Africa in this instance. Very important that we create a system that covers everybody in a unified risk pool, and that promises similar benefits for everybody who contributes on the basis of the common contribution rate and common rules of participation and common benefit design. That's what we are trying to establish.
Okay,
that's what the National Social Security Fund is about.
So are you saying this would be mandatory? Everyone who works would have to pay a certain amount into this fund?
Yes, everybody who works would have to be mandated to do this. Stephen, the important thing to understand is what we have put in the paper is a set of discussion points. We have done calculations that were assisted by the International Labour Organization to say in South Africa what would be a reasonable contribution rate and a reasonable benefit to offer everyone who would contribute. So that 12% that you are hearing is a range. We are saying from 8 to 12%, but none of this is going to be implemented immediately. We want to converse with our stakeholders. We want to engage with them and say what is a reasonable benefit that you think everyone who contributes should access, so that we don't have a situation where some people work all of their lives, but because they work for employers who don't have funds, or they move from employer to employer, they keep having to withdraw their benefits and start from scratch, because they then lose the benefits.
Sure. I get it. Yeah. I mean, I just have several questions. Do you believe it's legal to force people to pay into this fund whether they want to or not?
Well, here's the thing. This is not a question of, it will be legal when we write the law, but we have not written the law yet. And we have not as yet even hardened what exactly the contribution rate will be. This is a discussion paper. We want communities to engage and say, where do we think is an appropriate way to invest for yourself, and what is an appropriate contribution rate that you think you should pay? So this is a conversation that must be had in the country. We do not have this system in place at the moment. We have
Sure.
too many, a large proportion of the population retiring at 65 or whatever, and finally that their income suddenly dropped substantially because throughout their working life they didn't have a system in place for them to be able to contribute. It doesn't mean we're throwing away the private sector or we're throwing away the pension funds that are currently in place. We're saying those must remain integral to a comprehensive system of social security.
Sure. No.
So there's a complementariness that must be achieved between the national mandatory fund that offers similar benefits, and then the private sector fund must also become an additional contributory framework for people.
Okay, sure. Would you get exactly the amount of money you put in out? If you put in more money than the person you work next door to, would you get more out when you retired?
The intent at the moment, in terms of the design, is that at the very minimum, you should not lose what you've contributed. But we are also wanting to create a kind of guarantee of what is the accrual rate that you would get when you contribute to this fund. And obviously, there's a formula that will apply to everybody. And so if Stephen and myself are contributing the same amount and we work for the same period of time, then at the retirement age, we should get the same amount of money. That's the intent.
But even if one person earns a lot more than the other, you would still...
No. The contribution you pay, there's a formula that will be applied.
Right, I'm with you
10% of your salary, 10% of my salary. So that's how it's going to work.
I hate to say this, ma'am, but I'm sure you'll be aware of how cynical people are about the way that government treats our money. And I mean, there are plenty of other funds that have had huge problems. There's funds, I mean, not the unemployment insurance fund, that had a surplus, but there've been, the workman insurance fund, the compensation fund there, the road accident fund, dare I mention the road accident fund in this conversation? I have to put it to you that I think that many South Africans will not trust government with more of their money.
You know what, I fully understand that. And that is why we are also making proposals for the institutional framework. Firstly, when you say it's important to understand a public fund does not mean government is going to run it like it runs the normal systems in the country. This is a fund that will be taking contributions from people and investing those contributions and so forth, and it will be making a specific benefit promise to people. So it will be important from a governance perspective that it has a properly elected board, and it's not going to be a case of the Minister of Social Development chooses her friends to be in the board. It's going to be publicly nominated members to be part of that board, and that board will then have the authority to appoint and select the executive management of the board. So it's going to be a public fund to the extent that it includes everyone. But it's not going to be... Yeah.
We thought that would happen with the Public Investment Corporation, but I'm afraid we've seen there that there were issues there, and everybody thought that that was going to be fine, and it wasn't.
So hence the discussion paper and a very detailed section there on governance and management and all of those things, and how the election processes need to happen. We understand the skepticism of people, and therefore we want them to then contribute and say what would be the best way for this thing to ensure that we don't run into those things. But I think it's really important, Stephen, to say the rest of the world actually has these funds in place. South Africa being where we are in terms of the level of economic development, we are anomalous. And the people in our country who work all of their lives find that when they retire, they only have the grant to look forward to. And this is something that we have to address, and we can't say government must fund everyone at a higher level. So people must contribute, but you must address the institutional gap that makes them unable to contribute or unable to maintain contributions throughout their working life. Because when you work in an old mutual, you contribute to an old mutual fund. When you leave, you join another fund, it has different rules, different contribution rates, etc., etc. So portability is difficult, and retaining your contribution and therefore benefiting from the benefit of compound interest is lost. And as a result of that, our income replacement rate in the country is very low by international standards. So this is the gap that we're trying to plug, and it's a very important gap. We must plug it, but we want to hear and engage communities, engage even the private sector actors in this space to say, what is the best way to design this, such that we have higher levels of income protection for people in the country.
Brenda Sibeko, thank you so much for the explanation. Deputy Director General for Social Security in the Social Development Department. Will be joined now by the view from the National Treasury. The Deputy Director General for Tax and Financial Sector Policy is Ismail Momoniat. Mr. Momoniat, good afternoon to you. What's your reaction to this? This would be a huge change to the financial sector. The issue of a mandatory payment into this fund is likely to be quite controversial.
Good afternoon, SG, as everyone calls you on your earlier program in the morning. I think what Ms. Sibeko is putting out is obviously it's an aspiration. There's lots of inefficiencies in our current social security system, and this has been an old paper. It's still undergoing discussion. It's and perhaps what didn't come through when I say it's aspirational, it's a proposal, it's out for public comment, and it doesn't represent policy as yet. So, for example, I think the proposals on setting up a fund has been a proposal that's been out in a previous paper that was put out, I think, in 2015 in a white paper. And these proposals have been bouncing around within NADLAC. And at the moment, what the paper entails is a set of proposals that have come through those discussions. What it doesn't do is to look at the impact if such proposals come through on say, the current system, and will still require a lot of consultation with existing funds and so on. So I would not see this as a policy that's going to be implemented as yet. It's out for consultation, it will take comments, and only thereafter will any final decisions be made.
I asked the question to your counterpart in the Department of Social Development about whether this would be legal, and the response was, and I understand the response, that, well, it would be legal when we write the law, but the bigger question is whether it would actually be constitutional to insist that there's a mandatory payment like this. Now, tax is constitutional, but I suspect the arguments over this would be huge.
Absolutely. I think, Stephen, that's a good question that you're asking. And that's why I say that it's, these are very early days, and this may not be the only way to go. And certainly one needs to look at what's in the current system. And you can't have a situation where people have their private pensions and over and above that are going to have a state system. And I think the questions you pose, obviously people are concerned after state capture to have seen the abuse. People need to feel confident about where their funds are being held. So, that's why I say this is still a very early proposal. Certainly as Treasury, we have reservations with some of the proposals. They came from a lot of the NADLAC stakeholders. We don't agree with many of them. And certainly, I think the impact on the tax system has to be considered. So if you look at the proposals, there's still a lot of inconsistencies, and one needs to see how it's going to fit into the current tax system, the current retirement system, how it's going to improve the retirement system, for example. All those are still proposals that have to come to government, and it has to come to cabinet before it's finalized. So this document has not been approved by cabinet. This document is a document that's arising after consultations in the NADLAC process. And so it doesn't have any official governmental approval as such. It's still part of the consultation process.
We live in a cynical time, Mr. Momoniat. If by chance it were your birthday today, would you put your money in the government fund?
Well, I think one's got to...
Because I know it is your birthday today, right?
Why are you putting out this as it's a state secret, but thank you for wishing me well.
Ismail Momoniat, I do have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed.